At 11:58 p.m. on December 31st, while my neighbors popped champagne corks and cheered energetically from their high-rise apartment balconies across the illuminated city skyline, I sat quietly in my home office with a mug of steaming black coffee, watching the core back-end automation server of Apex Horizon Capital hum through its final Q4 bonus calculations. The ambient blue glow of three high-definition monitors illuminated my workspace, displaying real-time system telemetry, database transaction latency, and multi-tier authentication handshakes. For 49 years, I had built my life and career on methodical precision, structural discipline, and absolute technical clarity, and tonight was no exception. I had spent countless late nights maintaining server clusters across multiple enterprise data centers, ensuring that every financial transaction cleared without a single microsecond of delay or calculation variance. Suddenly, my central monitor flickered with a high-priority system notification. A new message had arrived in my inbox from the internal corporate network, bearing an icy, sanitized subject line. Performance termination notice. It contained exactly two boilerplate sentences, digitally generated and dispatched by an automated human resources daemon program that I had never once engaged with in person. There was no preceding telephone conversation, no formal exit evaluation, no manager debriefing, and zero professional courtesy. It was a cold, calculated digital executions dispatched precisely 2 minutes before the start of the new fiscal year, scheduled at a moment when corporate management calculated I would be out celebrating, drinking, or sleeping peacefully in bed. They operated under the comfortable corporate assumption that I was just another ordinary salaried corporate worker who would collapse into emotional panic, plead for severance pay, or weep over lost medical benefits. What corporate management failed to calculate was that I had spent 22 years navigating the high-stakes, unforgiving environment of enterprise software architecture across major financial trading hubs in Chicago and New York. For the past 3 years, I had personally forged every single line of mission-critical code that allowed Apex Horizon Capital to calculate, audit, and distribute its multi-billion-dollar quarterly financial assets. My late father had spent 40 years as a certified public accountant, instilling in me a relentless discipline regarding balance sheet precision, contractual clarity, and the absolute necessity of legal self-protection in corporate contracts. When the automated termination notice appeared, I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, slam my desktop keyboard, or display a single drop of frustration. Instead, I calmly took a deliberate sip of hot coffee, opened the core system audit terminal, and refreshed the live balance sheet interface. When the atomic server clock ticked past midnight to 12:01 a.m. on January 1st, the company's automated investor reporting portal went live to institutional shareholders across North America. Right beneath the high-yield portfolio summary, under a designated column titled Unpaid Balance Sheet Liabilities, a single line item glowed bright red next to my corporate licensing entity. $4,200,000. To understand how a routine corporate termination letter transformed into an immediate, non-negotiable seven-figure balance sheet crisis, you have to look back to the day Apex Horizon Capital almost collapsed from catastrophic system failure. 3 years prior, their legacy payout infrastructure suffered a devastating crash during a mandatory federal investor audit. Their automated accounting scripts failed to reconcile multi-million-dollar transactions. Tax escrow accounts fell completely out of regulatory compliance, and external auditors threatened to suspend trading operations immediately. In a state of sheer panic, the board of directors recruited me under a specialized emergency consultation contract. I brought over 2 decades of high-frequency trading architecture experience and enterprise database engineering to the table. Over 6 grueling months of 80-hour workweeks sitting in dim server rooms surrounded by cold server racks and hum of cooling fans. I completely dismantled their broken software pipeline and built a modular, fault-tolerant financial automation engine from the ground up. This sophisticated system seamlessly harmonized quarterly bonus distributions, complex tax withholdings, and deferred equity vesting schedules with absolute mathematical perfection. However, I had spent over 2 decades working inside corporate environments, and I understood precisely how executive management operated when money was on the line. I had witnessed dozens of brilliant senior engineers over 40 get exploited for their specialized intellectual property, stripped of their equity incentives, and unceremoniously discarded the moment a quarterly budget required aggressive trimming. Therefore, during initial contract negotiations with the former chief technology officer, I insisted upon a binding, airtight protective framework governed by federal software copyright standards under 17 USDC, Section 106. We embedded a dormant contractual retention mechanism designated as Clause 27D within the master legal appendix of my consulting agreement. The former CTO, who was desperate to save the company from immediate federal SEC sanctions, agreed to the terms without hesitation. The contract explicitly mandated that all core algorithmic payout logic remained proprietary intellectual property licensed exclusively to my independent corporate entity, Vance Tech Analytics LLC. Apex Horizon Capital retained full operational usage rights only while I remained actively employed, or until a formal mutual written release was executed upon my departure. If the company terminated my contract and subsequently executed my proprietary algorithmic code without securing that written clearance, Clause 27D would immediately activate an automatic deferred licensing penalty, reclassifying all downstream financial calculations as uncompensated intellectual property utilization billed at a fixed rate of $4,200,000. For 3 quiet years, that protective clause slept peacefully inside the enterprise software repository, safely tucked away within legal contract appendices that corporate executives never bothered to inspect or review. I maintained the company's financial infrastructure with meticulous, unwavering precision. I refused to participate in petty office politics. I skipped the vanity corporate happy hours, and I abstained from self-aggrandizing LinkedIn posts. I simply delivered clean, unbreakable, high-performance software architecture that never failed under load, even during peak market volatility and high trading volume events. Every executive bonus check, every quarterly shareholder dividend, and every glowing audit report presented to institutional investors rested entirely upon the back-end algorithms I had single-handedly written and verified. But executive memory in modern corporate finance is extraordinarily short, and executive gratitude evaporates the exact second a new climbing vice president decides to impress the board of directors by slashing senior engineering payroll. That organizational shift arrived 6 months ago in July, wrapped in a 3-piece tailored designer suit and radiating unearned corporate arrogance. His name was Gavin Croft, a 34-year-old newly appointed senior vice president of digital transformation. Gavin was the quintessential corporate buzzword climber who spoke fluently in vague management jargon and frequently interrupt technical architecture meetings to quote business school case studies he clearly did not understand. At his very first corporate town hall meeting, Gavin stood on stage boasting to staff that he intended to revolutionize the firm by cutting technical overhead, eliminating legacy bloat, and empowering nimble summer interns to replace complex engineering systems. He wore expensive sandalwood cologne that filled entire office hallways and spent his first month dragging junior interns into glass-walled conference rooms to brainstorm ways to streamline operational overhead. To Gavin, experienced senior engineers were not essential architects who understood structural financial risk. We were merely expensive line items on a quarterly expense ledger, legacy dead weight that needed to be purged to maximize executive profit margins. He genuinely believed that corporate seniority was an obstacle to innovation rather than a repository of deep operational knowledge, and he made no effort to hide his disdain for anyone who had been with the company longer than 2 fiscal quarters. Gavin Croft made his aggressive strategic intentions clear within weeks of stepping into the corporate headquarters. He publicly expressed his firm belief that enterprise software engineering was overly complex and that legacy infrastructure was kept complicated merely to justify the high compensation of senior technical staff. He constantly complained to the chief financial officer that our multi-tier authentication handshakes, checksum verification loops, and automated compliance locks were over-engineered, unnecessarily slow, and overly rigid for a fast-moving firm. What Gavin actually wanted was total administrative control over the executive bonus distribution queue without having to wait for rigorous automated compliance validations. By mid-December, I began detecting suspicious anomalies appearing in the server staging environment log files. Unverified manual override requests were repeatedly pinging our core API endpoints, originating from non-secure workstations assigned to Summersea interns. When I conducted a thorough forensic inspection of the underlying source code powering these override requests, I discovered that Gavin Croft had instructed two inexperienced junior interns to build a crude, unverified Excel spreadsheet macro titled Q4 Bonus ROI Accelerator Final V3. This macro was engineered to force inject preliminary bonus numbers directly into the live investor reporting portal, completely bypassing three mandatory security verification layers, checksum validations, and tax compliance locks that I had established. It was the digital equivalent of using cheap tape and rusty wire to disable a nuclear reactor's emergency cooling system, just to force a pressure gauge to display a pleasing number for an executive photo opportunity. The macro contained glaring amateur mistakes, missing zero-division error handlers, hard-coded financial constants, zero transactional rollback capabilities, and raw SQL query injections that exposed the entire database to severe corruption. I immediately flagged the unauthorized macro in our internal compliance monitoring software, issuing a formal security violation warning to Gavin and sending an automated proxy alert to the compliance risk department. 48 hours later, Gavin Croft strolled up to my cubicle, flanked by his two junior interns like bodyguards. He leaned against my partition wall with a patronizing, condescending smirk, staring down at my dual development monitors. He told me in a cold, superior tone that I was artificially slowing down the executive payout queue with obsolete verification protocols, and that the board of directors demanded early visual representations of Q4 bonuses without waiting for formal fiscal boundary validations. He smirked and added that software code was just basic instructions that any summer intern with basic scripts could write. I looked up at him calmly and explained that bypassing cryptographic authentication handshakes on live corporate financial databases violated fundamental regulatory compliance standards and exposed the firm to massive legal liability under GAAP accounting rules. I warned him explicitly that our core endpoints contained license validation handshakes tied to active developer keys. Gavin chuckled softly, dismissed my warnings with a wave of his hand, and arrogantly declared that executive management did not require permission from line engineers to accelerate business velocity. He had absolutely no comprehension that the underlying database was cryptographically bound to my active developer token. He did not know that my proprietary codebase contains silent, embedded handshake signatures, and he had certainly never taken the time to read Clause 27D in the Corporate Contract Archive. Gavin operated under the naive assumption that once enterprise software is deployed on corporate servers, it becomes the absolute, unencumbered property of the corporation to modify, abuse, or strip away at will. He believed that senior engineers were powerless subordinates who could be discarded without consequence. He left the office on New Year's Eve, fully convinced that he had outmaneuvered the engineering department and set the stage for his upcoming executive promotion. He believed that sending an automated performance termination email at 11:58 p.m. would permanently purge me from the company, allowing his crude Excel macro to take full control of the midnight bonus distribution run without technical resistance or human oversight. Sitting in my quiet home office at 11:59 p.m., I monitored the live server access logs on my secondary terminal. The automated termination system had officially revoked my corporate administrative credentials at 11:58 p.m. Exactly 2 minutes later, at 12:01 a.m., on January 1st, Gavin Croft's pre-scheduled cron job executed his unauthorized Excel macro across the main network. The macro attempted to scrape my proprietary payout algorithms to finalize the executive bonus pool. However, when the back-end system queried the corporate Active Directory, it discovered my user status marked as terminated and revoked. The cryptographic handshake required under 17 U.S.C. Section 106 instantly failed. The back-end system immediately recognized the execution as an unverified post-employment utilization of protected intellectual property without valid licensing clearance. The dormant security trigger embedded inside Clause 27D activated instantly. It did not crash the physical servers, nor did it erase the corporate database. Instead, it executed its legal mandate with total mathematical precision. The system automatically reclassified the entire downstream bonus distribution pipeline from internal corporate labor into an unresolved third-party licensing obligation owed directly to Vance Tech Analytics, LLC. Within seconds, the investor-facing dashboard updated its live balance sheet feed across institutional networks, where a clean, record-breaking financial summary was supposed to sit. A glowing red compliance flag appeared under unpaid liabilities, displaying an exact monetary figure: $4,200,000. Gavin Croft believed he had eliminated an expensive senior architect with a midnight email. Instead, he had unwittingly converted our entire bonus calculation engine into a binding multi-million-dollar corporate debt. The corporate trap had sprung silently, cleanly, and completely without flaw. Gavin had no idea that his ambition had just written a seven-figure bill for the firm, one that no executive slide deck could ever explain away, and one that would echo through every boardroom meeting for months to come. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the updated investor balance sheet dashboard, saved the digital timestamp verification logs, and exported the complete cryptographic audit trail to an encrypted external drive. I did not send an angry message to executive management, nor did I call human resources to complain about my abrupt termination. I simply powered down my workstation monitors, poured myself a fresh cup of herbal tea, and went to sleep peacefully. I knew with absolute certainty that while corporate executives slept off their New Year's Eve celebrations, the automated relentless gears of federal regulatory compliance and institutional financial auditing were already spinning into action. The financial crisis erupted at 7:12 a.m. On January 2nd, the first official business morning of the new fiscal year. The internal IT ticketing system exploded with dozens of urgent, high-priority emergency alerts. Executive corridors across the corporate headquarters were filled with confused managers staring at frozen screens. The automated bonus distribution pipeline had completely frozen, locking up tens of millions of dollars in scheduled executive payouts. At 7:14 a.m., corporate accounting flagged a massive tax escrow misalignment, reporting that Q4 financial totals were off by 11.6%. By 7:21 a.m., the automated compliance system initiated an emergency security isolation protocol across 14 core financial modules, citing unauthorized code execution and unverified software licensing credentials. Gavin Croft and his junior analytics team assumed the issue was merely a temporary software glitch, a minor script hiccup caused by the year-end date rollover. Gavin frantically ordered the junior IT staff to execute manual administrative overrides and force the bonus payout pipeline through the server. But Clause 27D was not a simple lines of code that could be commented out, bypassed, or erased with an administrative master key. It was a legally binding architectural lock woven directly into the fundamental data schemas. Every single time Gavin's team attempted to force the macro through the pipeline, the back-end system detected the unauthorized access and escalated the security classification higher up the compliance chain. By 8:04 a.m., the primary server management console was flashing red emergency alerts every 3 seconds. Dozens of high-value institutional transactions were trapped in a recursive verification loop. Phone calls from anxious wealth management partners began flooding the switchboard, demanding to know why Q4 bonus allocations were delayed. The automated pipeline repeatedly demanded a valid cryptographic license token from Vance Tech Analytics, LLC, a token that resided exclusively on my physical offline hardware security key. By 9:15 a.m., Chief Compliance Officer Marshall Stone was pulled out of a regional meeting to inspect the server logs. By 9:30 a.m., Senior Legal Counsel was running frantic keyword queries through the corporate legal repository. At 10 o'clock sharp, a junior compliance associate named Nigel Cooper finally discovered the original retention agreement tucked away in the contract archive. Nigel Cooper brought the physical contract file directly into Marshall Stone's office. Pointing to the explicit legal language on page 14, Nigel highlighted the binding terms of Clause 27D. They read the text together line by line. In the event of termination, any subsequent execution of proprietary algorithmic logic by Edward Vance without prior written clearance shall constitute unpaid license utilization, and all resultant financial flows shall be reclassified as outstanding IP dues payable to Vance Tech Analytics LLC. Marshall Stone read the paragraph 3 times, his face turning pale with absolute terror. The senior auditing partner from Bickford & Cole LLP, Walter Drake, reviewed the document and confirmed that under GAAP accounting standards, this uncleared liability rendered the firm's balance sheet legally uncertifiable. The company had not merely dismissed a senior software engineer. They had detonated a contractually enforced financial landmine that was now broadcasting an unverified multi-million-dollar liability directly to external auditing agencies. Every minute that passed without resolution compounded their exposure before federal regulators and institutional shareholders across the market. Meanwhile, I remained completely serene in my home office. At 10:30 a.m., acting through my corporate retained counsel, I formally submitted an electronic regulatory disclosure notice to the Securities and Exchange Commission under Rule 10b-5 and federal copyright statutes governing software protection. Every single document was timestamped, notarized, and cross-referenced with server logs. The legal filing formally documented an active, unresolved intellectual property ownership dispute regarding the core algorithms currently powering Apex Horizon Capital's live financial reporting infrastructure. In federal regulatory terms, an unreconciled financial disclosure tied to contested intellectual property is fatal. External auditing firm Bickford & Cole LLP immediately flagged Apex Horizon Capital's Q4 filings, issuing a complete halt on the certification of their annual financial statements until the $4,200,000 balance sheet liability was fully resolved. By 11:00 a.m., my personal mobile phone began ringing incessantly. Gavin Croft attempted to call me 6 times in 20 minutes. Desperate to demand that I provide an emergency administrative override code to clear the server lock. I let every single call roll straight to voicemail without answering. Next came frantic text messages and emails from human resources, claiming there had been an unfortunate technical misunderstanding regarding my automated termination notice and begging me to log into an emergency executive conference call. I ignored every single notification. My corporate legal counsel had already delivered a formal legal notice to the executive board of Apex Horizon Capital, stating in unambiguous terms that all communications regarding Vance Tech Analytics LLC must proceed strictly through registered legal representatives. On the morning of January 9th, after 4 brutal days of mounting operational chaos, institutional panic, and media scrutiny, the executive board convened an emergency closed-door session in the top-floor executive boardroom. There were no polished public relations statements or smooth corporate excuses in that room. Only cold sweat, stale coffee, and terrified corporate directors facing career annihilation. Board Chairman Harlan Montgomery, a 64-year-old corporate veteran known across Wall Street for his relentless, unforgiving demeanor, presided over the long mahogany table. Standing at the central projection podium, Chief Compliance Officer Marshall Stone presented the official forensic audit findings compiled by Bickford & Cole LLP. Marshall Stone explained to the board in stark detail that because Edward Vance had been terminated at 11:58 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and because Gavin Croft's macro had executed at 12:01 a.m., Clause 27D had been legally triggered under federal software copyright standards. The company was now legally obligated to disclose an unreconciled $4,200,000 balance sheet liability on its public 10-K regulatory filing. Marshall Stone emphasized that unless this liability was fully resolved before January 14th, external auditors would refuse to certify the firm's financial statements, triggering an immediate SEC investigation, potential criminal fraud charges, and a complete freeze on institutional shareholder trading. Chairman Harlan Montgomery slowly leaned back in his executive chair. his eyes narrowing into cold slits of pure fury. He surveyed the room of panicking executives and asked a simple, devastating question. Who authorized the late-night termination of Edward Vance without performing a comprehensive technical and contractual audit? Every pair of eyes in the boardroom turned instantly toward Gavin Croft. Gavin sat frozen in his tailored three-piece suit, his face completely drained of color and beads of sweat breaking out across his forehead. Gavin stammered frantically, attempting to shift blame to HR demons, junior interns, and technical complexity, claiming he acted decisively to eliminate unnecessary engineering overhead. Chairman Harlan Montgomery slammed his fist onto the mahogany table with a thunderous crack, cutting Gavin off mid-sentence with lethal authority. He reminded the room that under federal corporate governance and Sarbanes-Oxley regulations, executive management holds strict fiduciary responsibility to verify material contracts before taking actions that affect corporate compliance. He informed Gavin that by attempting to save a single engineering salary to boost his own internal metrics, Gavin had engaged in gross negligence, breached his fiduciary duty to shareholders, single-handedly saddled the corporation with a $4,200,000 legal debt and brought the entire firm to the brink of federal regulatory destruction. The general counsel then informed the board of their only two remaining legal options. They could either attempt to completely rewrite 14 core financial automation modules from scratch within 7 days, a technical impossibility that senior engineers estimated would require 6 months. Or they could sign a formal settlement agreement paying Vance Tech Analytics LLC the full $4,200,000 in exchange for a permanent intellectual property license release. The room went completely silent as the executive board realized there was no escape from the legal trap. There was no remaining room for corporate spin, political delay, or executive maneuvering. General counsel warned the board that pursuing litigation against Clause 27D in federal court would fail immediately and invite devastating shareholder derivative lawsuits. The robust software architecture I had constructed 3 years prior had executed its exact design purpose, insulating the creator from corporate exploitation. The board of directors voted unanimously within 10 minutes to approve the full settlement payout. Gavin Croft was stripped of his executive authority on the spot, stripped of his security credentials, and unceremoniously escorted out of the corporate headquarters by armed security guards, before the board meeting had even concluded. On January 20th, immediately following the official closing bell of the financial markets, Apex Horizon Capital submitted a quiet, mandatory amendment to its year-end 10-K financial disclosures with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Deep within the regulatory documentation, buried on page 32, under a footnote titled Resolved Intellectual Property Licensing Obligations, sat a clean, unvarnished financial record, $4,200,000 finalized, and paid in full to Vance Tech Analytics LLC for permanent algorithmic software licensing clearance. There were no flashy press releases, no victory announcements, and no formal corporate apologies. Corporate management wired the multi-million-dollar sum not out of generosity, goodwill, or ethical enlightenment, but because federal contract law and immutable technical reality left them with zero alternatives. Clause 27D had cast an unyielding spotlight over their executive greed, holding them fully accountable to the exact letter of the law. The full $4,200,000 payment arrived via direct federal wire transfer into the commercial bank account of Vance Tech Analytics LLC. 1 week after the financial settlement was finalized, the remaining back-end engineering staff at Apex Horizon Capital completed the grueling process of decoupling my original developer authentication keys from their live infrastructure servers. For the first time in 3 years, my remote administration monitoring console went completely quiet. The deployment logs recorded the final permanent status of my legacy software modules. Decommissioned, deprecated, settled in full. I watched the final system tokens clear from my screen with a deep, quiet sense of professional fulfillment. That exact same month, I officially established Vance Tech Analytics LLC as a premier, fully independent enterprise software architecture firm. Operating from a modern executive suite, my firm now provides high-level financial system automation, algorithmic auditing, and contractual risk mitigation consulting to major corporate clients nationwide. Former institutional partners who witnessed the Apex Horizon capital crisis reached out to retain our services, valuing our unmatched structural integrity, technical depth, and legal transparencies. Our core platform was built entirely from the ground up, completely free of legacy corporate bloat, administrative interference, or unverified executive spreadsheet macros. It functions with mathematical precision, total legal transparency, and unyielding structural stability. And at the very bottom of our official corporate website, rendered in muted gray typography beneath the footer of every page, sits a quiet single line of text that serves as a permanent warning to every corporate executive who foolishly believes senior technical talent can be callously exploited. Built by the engineer you tried to fire at midnight. Corporate executives frequently fall into the delusion that corporate leadership consists merely of slick PowerPoint presentations, buzzword-filled memos, and callous cost-cutting directives executed behind locked doors. They forget that modern financial institutions are built entirely upon the complex, invisible architecture forged by experienced technical professionals who understand how these systems actually function. True professional security does not come from corporate loyalty or executive promises. It comes from mastering your craft, building undeniable structural value, and embedding airtight legal protections into every agreement you sign. When Apex Horizon Capital attempted to erase my career with a cowardly automated email at 11:58 p.m. on New Year's Eve, they believed they were quietly concluding a routine employment contract. Instead, they wrote my name into their permanent financial ledgers forever, demonstrating that while executive arrogance may control the executive suite, it is the quiet master of the ledger who ultimately holds the key. Looking back at the entire saga, the lesson for every senior professional over 40 is crystal clear. Never allow corporate executives to mistake your quiet competence for vulnerability. When you build mission-critical systems, construct them with legal permanence. When you negotiate contracts, protect your intellectual property with federal statutory authority. And when corporate bean counters attempt to erase your contributions under the cover of dark midnight emails, let your architecture enforce the ledger while you sleep peacefully. Real corporate authority is not declared in a conference room. It is written into the code and contracts that govern the financial world. Throughout my entire professional career, I've seen short-sighted corporate managers attempt to reduce human technical expertise into easily replaceable commodities. But true technical excellence, architectural vision, and deep legal protection cannot be faked with executive slide decks or replaced by unverified software macros. When you take genuine pride in your craft, understand your legal rights, and build mission-critical systems with absolute structural integrity, no amount of corporate arrogance can ever take away what you have rightfully earned and protected.